Hey there, Squirrel Army! How's it going? For today, I'm going to be discussing some of my own personal decks because some people have been asking me about my own personal decks. I actually have two Selesnya decks, and this is a video about these decks specifically and how I basically took one deck strategy and complemented it to the other, and took that deck strategy and complemented it back to the other one.
You can join the Squirrel Army by subscribing.
Alrighty, so basically what I have got is one deck that was a +1/+1 counters style deck, and one deck that was more of a tokens deck. And what I did, which maybe you can kind of figure out, is take a lot of the +1/+1 counter stuff that was in my +1/+1 counters deck out of it and put it into my tokens deck, and take most of the token stuff that was in my tokens deck and took it out and put it into my +1 counters deck. Now I'm going to go through why I did that in this video.
So the main reason for me switching the internal strategy of my +1 counters deck towards the tokens deck and switching the tokens strategy into the +1 counters deck was a choice that I decided to make. I don't know whether I'm actually saying that you guys should do this, but certainly you guys can certainly think about it. But I think it's more of, this is what I did because I found this to be a strategy that was, well, initially not working for me, and therefore I figured out that this strategy to switch them over would be a lot better for me in the long run. So the problem that I had, and I didn't really realize this for a long time, I played both of these decks for quite a while now, and really haven't had that much problems with them. But one of the big problems I had with them was that, yes, you're on theme for what you're doing in the +1 counters deck or in the tokens deck, but you're doing too much of sort of the same thing. Especially with my face commander there, it's like, well, my commander's already really doing and fulfilling that part of the strategy, so I just want to do that more and enhance that more, or find ways for it to be better utilized. So it would often become the problem that the other cards in the deck would outshadow the commander, or just not really help the strategy. In the +1 counters deck, it would be often that you have too much stuff that is too big, but you don't really have enough bodies to kind of put those counters and things on. So you're just sort of sitting there going, wow, I really wish I could disperse my sort of forces or whatnot, or not have such big threat or whatever else is on the field, because it's obvious what the sort of target is. But if you have multiple different threats on the field, then it's a lot more difficult for opponents to sort of deal with them as easily in some ways, because again, yeah, sure, they can board wipe, but still, if you diversify your threats, it's a lot harder for your opponents to sort of deal with them all sometimes, because, yeah, again, you can have indestructible, or you can have things that, have persist, or whatever else, or undying, or whatnot, those sorts of things. Or you can just do other sorts of things as well, I guess, but still, you're diversifying what your opponents have to worry about, and you're broadening your strategy there, instead of just having, well, I'm doing +1 counter stuff. That is very cool, but honestly, again, once you're sort of getting, or have got your commander doing that thing, you just want to keep doing that thing better and better somehow, some way, so that, you can enhance what that is doing. Same with the token generating commander. The problem that I found there was pretty much the opposite, that you have all this small stuff and not nearly enough ways to buff them up and make them really, really threatening. And it's just like, cool, I can't really do anything because none of my stuff is threatening enough or can do enough stuff to anyone. And there's no real, like, ping damage or life drain or anything like that in Selesnya colors. Yes, I could change it out to being a, adding another color. I could go into Abzan or whatever else and add some life drain there, or I could add black and be in Naya to add pingers and things like that. But I didn't really want to go down that route because I wanted to stick to 2 colors at the time, and I still think I do because the commander's really good, and I couldn't really find a better Naya or Abzan commander. There is a combo commander that's out there, obviously, in Gave or Gave or however you want to say it. But yeah, like, I just don't want to do that because that's obviously the best one that's out there, and I just want to do something else that's a bit more unique and I feel like is kind of cool. So that's the route that I wanted to go. I wanted to go down this route of experimenting and figuring out how I can shift the strategy of the tokens deck towards the counters deck, therefore giving it more things that generate tokens throughout the game, therefore having more bodies for that deck to put its counters onto and dispersing the threats and putting more of the +1/+1 counter strategy stuff into the tokens decks, because again, it's already generating a lot of bodies, but it needs to generate a lot more force multipliers so that you can actually make your stuff threatening, make your stuff lethal to your opponents. So that is why I did it, and that is kind of how I did it. I think it was a cool experiment to do this whole thing, and I kind of wanted to discuss it with you guys because it's one of those things that I think this was the crux of the problem of some decks. Like, when you're talking about what you're doing and what strategy you're doing, like, again, when you're saying, this is my strategy or whatever. Okay, cool. So what's the backup strategy? There is no backup strategy. Well, that's a problem. Like, again, like, if you've got a token deck, it's just one of those things of being like, wow, if I'm just making these pitiful small tokens, and yes, maybe I can make a bunch of them, but still they're not very threatening and they're not very evasive, so hey, how am I actually going to find a way to win with these things? You've got to start planning, okay, well, how else can I buff up my stuff? How else can I gain advantages? How else can I get the strategy win that I want in the colors that I am restricted to? And I think that's the fun part. But again, just picking a random card, let's say you just put in some combo like Chain of Smog combo into your deck. Yeah, sure, that can win you the game, but it's not really essential to whatever else your deck's kind of doing. And I could put in like Cathar's Crusade and the Squirrel generating Scurry Oak, because that would effectively just go infinite. But again, it's not the strategy. It's just one of those things where I could put in Ivy Lane Denizen and Scurry Oak to make infinite tokens. Like, again, I could do that, but again, is that really the strategy? And again, in a sense, you've actually got to say, well, hang on, wait a minute. That's an infinite loop that I can't actually stop, so I'm just stuck, in that loop or whatever. There is some that aren't, but yeah, again, there are some that basically you stall out the game forever and ever, and it's just like, well, I can't actually do anything about it because it's an infinite loop that even I can't stop. So you've got to also be able to sort of stop your own loops sometimes, because otherwise you can't progress past a certain point and it just stalls out the game forever, effectively. But then again, people might just scoop to it because they can see that you can win. But then again, they might be like, well, how do you actually stop the loop? And then you're just like, well, I can't, in a sense, or whatever. But again, it's just one of those things that it is a bit annoying sometimes. But anyway, it is one of those things that I think if you're thinking about strategy and what your deck's actually doing and why your deck's actually trying to do that thing, you're going, okay, well, this is my strategy or that is my strategy, but how do I, mitigate that strategy and make it better? The way I mitigated my tokens deck's strategy was to find more force multipliers, adding more +1/+1 counters. The main reason I wanted to add +1/+1 counters rather than any other buff into that color or into that deck was because it was one thing that I actually had the cards, but it was another because I found that there was a lot of cards that kind of dealt with +1/+1 counters in the deck already, and the commander already kind of dealt with +1/+1 counters as well as tokens, so it felt like a good fit. And I just, like, again, that counters deck really needed more token generation, and I really wanted it to have as many human generators as possible, or things that generated humans as well, things that were humans, things that generated humans, etc., basically, because the commander really cares about humans, tapping humans for mana and whatnot. So that's a very good thing to do because, again, you can get that 6-8 mana, whatever it is, ability and, put counters on all your creatures. So, yeah. And then you've got some of those cards that, again, turn either your token generation into more lethal things, or you've got things that make your things that have +1/+1 counters, etc., more lethal or more dangerous in some way. So again, you've got all kinds of little niches in both of those things that I just already kind of had, and I wasn't really, like, I didn't really have a whole... it's not like I have no money for it, but again, I just didn't really want to spend too much more money on these decks because I'd already invested quite a lot, and yes, I could just tear both of them apart and build one good deck or whatever out of them or whatnot, but that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to keep the two different strategies going, but just sort of, make sure that the decks actually had a sort of more cohesive way to go, well, this is actually how I'm going to make my tokens threatening in this deck, because now I've got a bunch of +1/+1 counters. I've already got an easy way to generate tokens, so I just need more ways to generate a force multiplier or evasion or whatever so that I can actually poke people and kill them. And in the other deck, again, I just need more bodies to sort of spread out those things that my commander's already kind of doing. Plus, again, if I've got a lot of those cards that are humans, they will really help me out in doing that as well. So, and a lot of those cards happen to be humans, so it was just like, well, or generate humans. So again, it was just like, well, this is basically a perfect marriage in that regard. Yes, I did have to find a few cards here and there for them, and I did have to cut a few cards here and there, and whatnot. And yes, sure, I still kept some of the cards that did sort of some stuff in the +1 counters deck, like Vorinclex, and Hardened Scales and cards like that increased the number of counters that I get, because that's kind of different than cards that actually generate counters. It's different if you're actually adding counters, because that really helps out what the commander's already kind of doing, adding counters. And I also kept a lot of the extra token generator stuff into the other deck, because it's already doing that. But if we're just going to do that better, it's really good. Like Anointed Procession, Parallel Lives, I kept those cards in there because, again, that's what the commander's already doing, so just do that better, so you have more bodies to do stuff with. But anyway, And that is it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it, found it interesting, whatnot, whatever. And I hope you guys will join me again in another one.